The circus ship, I first read about a shipwreck in a magazine called Down East Magazine. I live up in Maine, and there's a magazine in Maine called Down East. And about 25 years ago, I read this article in Down East about this shipwreck that happened back in 1836. And being a very visual person, when I flip through a magazine, a lot of times I'll skip articles unless something really catches my eye. And I was flipping through this magazine, and there was this beautiful sort of old-fashioned wood engraving of this ship on fire. And nothing really unusual about it, except right as I was about to flip the page, down in the corner of the picture, there was an elephant swimming away from this shipwreck. And I thought, wow, what is that all about? So I read the article, and it told about this shipwreck that happened on October 25th, 1836, off the mid-coast of Maine. And it was a steamship carrying a full circus. It had an elephant, 2 lions, a tiger, a bunch of different animals, a band, a full circus that was transporting from St. John, New Brunswick to Portland, Maine. And they hit a gale, and through a series of miscommunications, the boiler was fired up with no water in the boiler. And the boiler became red hot, and there's just, when you read the actual story, it's just so unbelievable. You can't imagine this would ever happen, and yet 175 years earlier, there was an elephant swimming in the ocean right off from where I live. So, the idea that whole thing must have just sort of stuck somewhere in the back of my head, because at the time I wasn't writing books. But it popped out years later when I was writing books, and I thought, oh, I should really study that again. And at the time I was meeting with some other local authors and illustrators. We had this sort of impromptu writing group. And I remember mentioning to the group, I said, I'm thinking of writing this book about, it was a ship that had a circus that sank, and 2 of the members of this group said, oh yeah, we know all about that. And they instantly, started sending me these articles about this shipwreck. And the more I read, I was like, wow, this is really crazy. But it was such a scary story. I mean, it was a huge news story at the time. In 1836, it made newspapers all over the country, probably because it was so unusual. But I couldn't tell the actual story because it was very scary. People died, animals died in the fire. I mean, it was a very tragic, scary story. But there was still something about the basic idea that I really liked and I thought could work for kids. And so I took that one little seed and sort of built a new story around the idea of a ship carrying a circus sinking off the coast of Maine. And in my book, they all swim to an island, and then sort of this whole adventure takes place on the island. And it's all fictional, except for the fact that there really was a ship carrying a circus that sank off the coast of Maine. There are stories, though, however, in the real story that there are rumors that the animals went off from the shipwreck and started living in different parts of Maine. And that's what made one of the things that made the whole story so interesting. Like they said, the elephant swam off and lived in a farmer's barn on one of the islands for years. There's stories that a woman was coming home from church on a coastal town, and she cut through the woods, and she came to a clearing in the woods, and there across the clearing was the tiger staring at her. So, I mean, you hear these stories, and I'm sure it was all just embellished. I mean, like one reporter read one account and said, well, I can make that better, and added these things to it, because most of these are untrue. But it was those little things that I just thought were so imaginative, and so I sort of used some of those ideas and created my own story. I also think it's nice that the author's note is in the back. I mean, because you can enjoy the story, you can enjoy the adventure and sort of find the animals and have a good time with the book. And then if you get to the back, if you read the author's note, and I'm sure a lot of people don't, but if you read the author's note, it may make you think, wow, okay, and go back and read it again and see the similarities and the differences.